It started with silence. Not the kind that brings peace. The kind that spreads like mold inside your chest, slow, quiet, deadly. Clara Morgan hadn't cried the day her husband left. She didn't scream when he emptied their joint account. She didn't even flinch when the lawyer handed her the final notice of foreclosure on what used to be their dream home in Denver. She just stood there, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at a countertop she no longer owned. Because grief doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it arrives in stillness, the kind that makes you question if your life ever really happened. Clara had been married for 15 years. 15 years of shared holidays, routines, taxes, plans. 15 years of sacrifice, compromise, survival. And in less than 6 months, everything she had built was gone. Gone not because of death. Gone because of quiet betrayals, one overlooked transaction at a time. Her husband, Peter, had been the type who smiled through the lies. Always calm, always calculated. The kind of man who convinced you that your doubts were the real problem. She hadn't realized the depth of the debt until the bank called. She hadn't seen the affair coming until the woman showed up at her door. Uninvited, unapologetic, unaware that Clara hadn't even known. There was no dramatic explosion. No final confrontation. Peter simply took what he wanted and walked away with the rest. And now, at 41, Clara found herself standing in the wreckage. No husband. No house. No career. The marketing agency where she worked had closed 3 weeks after the divorce, and the severance barely covered her last grocery bill. All she had left was a rusted Ford Escape, a few boxes of clothes, and a name she wasn't sure she recognized anymore. That's when she left. Not for a vacation. Not for clarity. She left because staying had become unbearable. Because every corner of that city reminded her of who she used to be, and she was no longer that woman. She packed everything she owned into her car, closed the trunk, and drove. No map. No destination. Just the sound of the tires humming against asphalt and the occasional sob she didn't let fully surface. 2 days later, she pulled into a tiny town in northern Arizona. Winslow. She'd never heard of it. But the gas station was open, and the air smelled like dust and something forgotten. She slept in the car that night behind a grocery store, curled up in the passenger seat with a blanket that didn't reach her feet. At 3 a.m., she finally let herself cry. Not for Peter. Not even for the loss. She cried because she was terrified. Because for the first time in her life, there was no next step. No plan. No one. The next morning, she walked into a diner called the Crooked Spoon. It smelled like coffee, bacon, and lives that hadn't changed in years. The kind of place where the waitress knows your dog's name and how you take your eggs. Clara asked if they were hiring. The woman behind the counter, mid-60s, tight gray bun, a face that didn't tolerate excuses, looked her up and down. You from around here? No. You runnin' from something? Clara paused. Kind of. The woman nodded once. Name's Marlene. You wash dishes. Yes. Then follow me. And just like that, Clara became the invisible backbone of a place she didn't know she needed. Days turned into weeks. She washed plates, wiped counters, scrubbed grease from pans that hadn't seen steel wool in years. She went home each night to a rented room above the gas station. One twin bed, a sink that leaked, and a window that looked out onto nothing. And still, something inside her began to shift. Not hope. Not yet. But breath. She could breathe. There were no reminders here. No anniversaries, no lawyers, no pitying eyes. Just steam from the sink, the hum of the freezer, and the occasional, "Thanks, hon," from a regular who didn't care where she'd come from. Then one day, it happened. The man at table 3. Late 30s, soft eyes, and hands that looked like they'd built things. He ordered black coffee. No sugar. No food. Just sat there, staring at the cracked Formica tabletop like it held the answer to a question he was afraid to ask. Clara noticed him. Because he looked the way she felt on the day she arrived. Empty, but not broken. She refilled his cup without asking. He nodded in thanks. 4 days, he kept coming back. Same table. Same silence. They didn't speak. Until one afternoon, as she passed by his booth, he looked up and asked quietly, "Did you start over here, or did life just stop long enough to make you think you had to?" She froze. Because no one had asked her anything real in weeks. And she didn't know if he was talking about himself, or her, or both. But something inside her answered. "I think I stopped pretending I was fine," and the rest followed. He didn't smile. But he didn't look away either. And that was the beginning. Not of romance. Not yet. But of something deeper. Recognition. And that's when things began to shift, again. Because what Clara didn't know yet was that this man would become the mirror she didn't know she needed. And everything after that would challenge everything she thought she had already lost. Clara didn't ask his name. Not the first time. She wasn't ready to know it. Knowing someone's name meant you might start needing them. And she wasn't sure she could afford another kind of loss. Still, the man from table 3 kept returning. Every morning, at precisely 7:30, he'd walk through the fogged-up glass door of the Crooked Spoon, nod at Marlene, slide into the booth near the window, and wait for his black coffee. Clara never asked questions. But she noticed everything. The way he rubbed his left wrist like something used to be there, a watch, maybe, or a cuff. The way he always looked out the window before speaking, like he was scanning the horizon for something that might never return. The way his eyes softened when she poured his second cup. Some men looked at her like she was invisible. Some looked at her like she was easy. But he looked at her like she was familiar. And that was the most dangerous gaze of all. 3 weeks passed before she spoke to him again. It was raining. Not the kind of rain that cleanses, the kind that clings to you. Clara had shown up early for her shift, hair damp, shoes soaked. She could feel the cold all the way down to her bones. He was already there. He looked up as she passed. "No coat?" he asked. She paused. "Didn't bring one when I left." He nodded. "Didn't press." She turned to walk away. Then stopped. "Do you come here because the coffee's good?" He smiled for the first time. It was subtle, lopsided, sad. "I come here because I don't have to pretend to be okay." That answer hung between them. For the first time in months, Clara felt the words crawl up her throat before she could swallow them down. Same. That day, she sat across from him after her shift. Just for 10 minutes. No agenda. No expectation. He told her his name was Jack. Just Jack. He didn't mention a past, or a job, or where he slept at night. And she didn't ask. Because something told her, whatever brought him here had the same weight as what she was carrying. And maybe neither of them needed to explain it yet. Instead, they talked about weather. About coffee. About how strange it was that in a town of 3,000 people, 2 ghosts could find each other in a diner no one talked about. It became a rhythm. He'd come in. She'd bring his coffee. And after her shift, if the timing felt right, she'd sit. They didn't flirt. They didn't touch. They simply existed. Side by side. Until one night, Clara walked back to her room above the gas station and found a folded piece of paper slid under her door. No name. Just a line of ink, handwritten in neat, all-caps letters. "You don't belong here." She froze. Her fingers went cold. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even cruel. It was worse. It was a reminder of what people thought when they saw a woman trying to build a life after her world had collapsed. Of what it meant to take up space when people assumed your pain should have made you smaller, not louder. She sat on the edge of the bed, letter in hand, breathing hard. For a moment, she thought of leaving. Packing again. Driving off. Disappearing the way she had before. But this time, something inside her stayed still. Because the woman she used to be would have vanished. But the woman she was becoming, slowly, painfully, wasn't built for running anymore. The next morning, she returned to the diner. Face forward. Chin up. No questions. Jack saw her and immediately knew something was wrong. He waited until after her shift. They sat in silence longer than usual. Then he asked, "What happened?" She pulled the paper from her pocket and slid it across the table. He read it. Expression unreadable. Then he looked up. "You know what the hardest part about starting over is?" She shook her head. "People don't hate that you're healing. They hate that you survived without their permission." That broke something in her. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. But a part of her that had been carrying shame like a second skin finally exhaled. He reached across the table and placed the note face down. "I don't care who left that. You belong anywhere your feet decide to land." And somehow, in that moment, Clara believed it. Not because it was romantic. Not because it fixed everything. But because it felt like truth. And sometimes, that's all healing really needs. One piece of truth, spoken out loud, to drown out the 100 quiet lies we've told ourselves. That night, Clara slept through until morning. For the first time in almost a year. It was a Tuesday when everything shifted. The diner was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel louder, the scrape of cutlery, the low hiss of the coffee machine, the creak of old vinyl booths adjusting to tired bodies. Clara was wiping down the counter when she saw Jack talking to someone near the front door. A woman. Mid-30s, tightly wound hair, sharp suit. She wasn't from Winslow, that much was obvious. Her heels were too clean, her voice too clipped. Jack didn't smile. Clara couldn't hear what they were saying. But she saw the woman hand him something, a small manila envelope, and then turn and walk out without waiting for a response. Jack stood still for a long moment, just holding it. His fingers twitched like he wasn't sure whether to open it or set it on fire. He looked up once and saw Clara watching. For the first time since they'd met, he looked away. That night, he didn't stay. No coffee. No booth. No quiet company. He just left. And Clara felt the weight of his absence like gravity had doubled. The next day, she found him sitting on the back steps of the diner before sunrise. Hands in his jacket pockets. Face blank. She brought him a coffee without asking. Set it beside him. Sat down. Neither spoke for almost 5 minutes. Then, "She's my ex-wife," Jack said quietly. "That envelope? Divorce finalization. Custody agreement. Child support details." Clara turned to look at him. He didn't look broken. He looked hollow. "She tracked me down," he continued. "Took her a year. I didn't leave to escape responsibility. I left because I was destroying everything I touched." The words fell like stones. He glanced at her, searching her face. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to be seen that way again. As a man who failed. As a father who walked away. But you deserve the truth." Clara stared out toward the empty road. "I didn't run from a man. I ran from a version of myself I didn't recognize anymore." He nodded. "And did you find her?" "Pieces," she said. "Some days they fit. Some days they don't." He exhaled, deep and slow. Then, almost reluctantly, "I have a daughter." Clara looked at him. "She's 6. Name's Sophie. Looks nothing like me. Which is probably a good thing." "Do you miss her?" "Every single day." That silence, the kind that cuts between two people who suddenly see each other more clearly, stretched again. Then Clara said, softly, "Go back." He shook his head. "It's not that simple." "No," she agreed. "But neither is staying away." He looked at her like she'd said the one thing he was terrified to admit. "I don't want to lose you," he whispered. "You never had me," she replied. "Not yet. What we are, it's something in progress. Something fragile. And that's why it can't be built on lies." Jack nodded, eyes damp but proud. "Thank you." "For what?" For not letting me be a coward. She smiled then. It wasn't wide. But it was real. That afternoon, he left again. But this time, it was different. This time, she wasn't watching him disappear. She was watching him return, to something greater than either of them. And strangely, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt stronger. Because love isn't just about holding on. Sometimes, it's about being the one person who tells the other, you can do this. You're worth doing the hard thing for. The days felt different after Jack left. Not heavier. Not lighter. Just quieter in a way that forced Clara to listen to herself again. The crooked spoon moved like always. Marlene barking orders, the old bell on the door jingling whenever someone came in for pie and gossip. But Clara moved through it differently now. Not as a ghost. Not as someone hiding. She was present. She was watching. She was choosing. Each dish she washed. Each table she wiped. Each smile she returned. All of it, somehow, became part of something she hadn't felt in a long time. A rhythm she owned. She started waking up earlier. Not because she had to, but because the morning quiet before the town woke up became her sanctuary. A place where she could drink her coffee slowly, write in a cheap spiral notebook she bought at the gas station, and feel herself rebuilding. Not fast. Not dramatically. But real. Sometimes, she'd write just one sentence. I made it through yesterday. Sometimes, she'd write more. Maybe I wasn't weak. Maybe I was just exhausted from pretending to be strong. Marlene noticed the change. One afternoon, she tossed Clara a set of keys and said, I trust you to close up now. That simple gesture, keys jingling in her palm, felt louder than any apology Peter had ever muttered, any praise she'd once fought for in boardrooms. Later that night, alone in the diner, Clara turned off the lights one by one. When she reached the front door, she paused. Looked out onto the street. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a visitor in her own life. She felt rooted. Not because she'd found a home, but because she was no longer trying to escape herself. A few days later, a small envelope arrived at the diner, addressed in a handwriting she instantly recognized. Jack. Inside, a photo. A little girl in pigtails and a blue hoodie, beaming at a playground slide. And one line scribbled below it. Her name's Sophie. She asked if you like dinosaurs. I said probably. Clara laughed. Not a full laugh. Just enough to taste something bright in her throat. She didn't write back. Not yet. She simply folded the photo, placed it gently in her notebook, and kept going. That weekend, Clara helped Marlene organize the storeroom. Boxes from years ago, unopened. In one, buried under plastic trays, she found an old hand-painted sign, Homemade Pies, asked Clara. She held it up, confused. Marlene shrugged. There was another Clara here. Years ago. She left. But she made the best damn apple pie this place ever served. Clara smiled. I don't know how to make pie. Well, Marlene said, lighting a cigarette and pointing to the kitchen. Maybe it's time you learned. So she did. She burned the first batch. And the second. But by the fourth try, it didn't taste like failure. It tasted like beginning. Like claiming space in a world that never thought to offer her a seat at the table. He walked into the diner on a Thursday afternoon. The kind of afternoon Clara usually liked. Slow, steady, ordinary. Until it wasn't. Peter. He hadn't changed much. Still carried himself like the room belonged to him. Hair carefully styled, coat too clean for a place like this. But there were lines around his eyes now, sharper. His confidence didn't wear the same armor. He scanned the room like he expected someone to announce him. Then he saw her. And for the first time in their history, he looked unsure. Clara stood behind the counter, dish towel in hand, heart thudding so loud she was sure the glasses on the shelf could hear it. He smiled. That same curated, professional smile. Clara. She didn't move. Didn't smile back. What are you doing here? she asked, her voice calm but dry. I was in Phoenix for a conference. Thought I'd come see how you're doing. She almost laughed, but it stuck in her throat. How I'm doing? Peter stepped closer, lowering his voice. I've been thinking about you. About us. I didn't handle things well. I see that now. Clara stared at him, suddenly overwhelmed by the absurdity of it. He thought this was about closure. Or redemption. Or maybe, he thought he still had power. I'm not who I was, Peter. I know. I can see that. No, she said, folding the towel slowly. You see someone different. But you don't know anything. You didn't come here for me. You came here to fix the version of yourself that left. Peter's smile cracked slightly. I made mistakes. No, she said. You made choices. Every lie. Every secret account. Every silence. That was you choosing you. He stepped back a little, the air between them shifting. I lost everything after you left, he said. The house. The partnership. Even she left. There it was. The silent confession. The mistress. The fallout. The unraveling. But Clara didn't flinch. Because something in her had already buried that grief. She'd grieved the lie long before it ended. What she was facing now wasn't heartbreak, it was closure she no longer needed. I'm sorry that happened, she said, voice steady. But it's not mine to carry. Peter's face fell, slowly. I thought maybe we could start again, talk. Even just have dinner. Clara looked around the diner. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee. The hum of the old fridge. Marlene arguing with a supplier in the back. A regular tapping his spoon against a mug. Her world now. Her life. Not glamorous. But hers. No, she said simply. We had 15 years to talk. I'm building something now. Something honest. I don't need dinner. I need peace. He nodded. A shallow, wounded nod. Not angry, just exposed. Goodbye, Peter. He hesitated. But then he left. No final word. No dramatic exit. Just a man walking out of a life that no longer belonged to him. And as the bell above the door jingled, Clara exhaled something she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was release. Later that night, she sat on the back steps of the diner, the same place Jack used to sit. She held the notebook on her lap, pen in hand. She wrote, "He came back. But I didn't." And then below that, "The woman I used to be would've served him pie. The woman I am now doesn't need to feed ghosts." She closed the notebook, looked up at the stars. For the first time, she realized something profound. Starting over isn't one big decision. It's hundreds of small ones. Every day, every no, every boundary, every time you refuse to be who you were just to make someone else feel comfortable. And in that moment, Clara wasn't healing. She was whole. Summer came early that year. The heat settled over Winslow like a slow exhale, warming cracked sidewalks and making the paint on the diner's front sign peel just a little more. Inside, everything was the same, and everything had changed. Clara now ran the morning shifts. Marlene had semi-retired, which mostly meant she stayed in the back, smoked half a pack by noon, and barked feedback through the kitchen door like a retired coach who couldn't help but stay in the game. But Clara, she ran the place. People started asking for her. Regulars left tips with little notes. "That pie saved my week." Truckers left behind postcards from distant states. She even had a standing pie order for a Sunday church that had once side-eyed her for showing up alone. And that room above the gas station? She moved out of it. Rented a small house on the edge of town. 2 bedrooms. A crooked porch. Faded blue shutters. Nothing fancy. But the first time she stood inside it, barefoot on the uneven floorboards, she whispered aloud, I'm home. She hung nothing on the walls at first. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't rushing anything anymore. Everything now had to earn its place. Even the quiet. One evening in late June, Clara stood in the kitchen rolling out dough when there was a knock at the door. She wiped her hands, opened it, and there he was. Jack. Same eyes, same stillness, but different, more present. Like he'd spent time collecting the parts of himself that had once been scattered. He held a folded piece of paper in his hand. She raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, she said. Another custody update? He smiled. Actually, it's a drawing. He unfolded it. A child's scrawl. Stick figures. A tall man, a tiny girl with braids, and a woman with long brown hair. Beneath it, written in blue crayon. Me, Daddy, and the lady with kind eyes. Clara blinked. She drew this after I told her about you, he said. After I told her about how someone once helped me remember I was still worth showing up for. They stood in silence for a moment. Then he added, I'm not here to pick up where we left off. She nodded slowly. Good. Because we left off at a cliff, and I'm not interested in falling. He chuckled. I'm here to see if you'd let me walk beside you for a while. No promises. No expectations. Just real things. Clara leaned against the doorframe. And what if I say no? Then I'll thank you for the pie and go. She studied him. Really studied him. He didn't look like a man who wanted to be saved. He looked like a man who had started saving himself, and now had space to hold something without crushing it. She stepped back and opened the door wider. Then I guess you'd better come in before the pie burns. Later, they sat on the porch as the sun dipped low behind the hills. Jack spoke softly about Sophie, how she was growing, how she asked too many questions, how she had started sleeping through the night again. Clara listened. She didn't imagine wedding rings, or white fences, or shared bank accounts. She imagined Sunday mornings, fresh coffee, 2 chairs, space to laugh, and silence that didn't feel like punishment. She imagined building something brick by brick, not to prove anything to anyone, but simply because she could. Jack looked at her. You seem lighter. I am, she said. I stopped waiting to feel whole. I started acting like I already was. He smiled. And what happened? She met his eyes, steady and unshaken. Turns out, I was never broken. Just buried. They sat in that truth for a long time. No rush. No grand music. Just warmth. And stillness. And a woman who had finally stopped surviving long enough to start living. The first storm came in late July. The kind that doesn't ask for permission, it just arrives, loud and sudden, washing the streets clean whether you're ready or not. Clara was closing the diner when the thunder cracked like a bone snapping overhead. Rain poured in sheets across the glass. She leaned her forehead against the cool window, watching as the world blurred into grays and motion. The lights flickered, then died. The silence inside felt different now. Not threatening. Not hollow. Just honest. She lit 2 candles, grabbed the last slice of pie from the display, and sat in her usual booth, the one Jack used to claim every morning. She smiled at the memory. But it didn't ache. It warmed. It was strange how life had become simple again. Not easy. Not pain-free. But simple in the way that she finally understood what mattered. She didn't need the old house with 5 bedrooms and a manicured lawn. She didn't need a man beside her to feel like she belonged to the world. She needed this. Moments like this. Rain, silence, pie, and peace. She took out her notebook and wrote slowly, letting each word stretch across the page like breath. I don't owe anyone my pain anymore. Then, a pause. And below that. And I don't have to keep telling the story of who I was, just to prove who I've become. The door creaked open. She looked up, startled, expecting the storm, or the wind, or no one. But it was Marlene. Soaked, smirking, holding a bottle of wine under one arm and a plastic bag with 2 chipped glasses in the other. "Figured you wouldn't want to ride this one out alone," she said. Clara laughed. "You hate storms." "I hate bad wine more," Marlene said, setting everything on the table. "But this is the good kind. Celebration wine." Clara raised an eyebrow. "What are we celebrating?" Marlene poured them both a glass and sat down. "You. This place. The fact that you didn't pack up and vanish like the last Clara. The fact that you stayed." Clara blinked. She hadn't thought of it like that. She had stayed. Through heartbreak. Through shame. Through a town that didn't know what to do with a woman who refused to apologize for healing on her own terms. She lifted her glass. To pie. To storms. To staying. Marlene clinked her glass with hers. To the woman who came in looking like the end, and turned it into a beginning. And as the storm roared outside and the candlelight danced between them, Clara didn't think about who she had been. She thought about who she was now. Someone whole. Someone real. Someone home. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.